Hi, my name's Nomi. 3 months ago, at my own graduation, my father stood up, in front of everyone, and said, "You're not my daughter." 400 people heard it. The cameras caught it. I just stood there, humiliated, while he cut me off like I was nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing it wasn't anger. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. My whole life. They'd been preparing to erase me. And the woman wearing my mother's necklace? She'd already replaced me. I thought I lost my family that day. But I was wrong. I never had them. And the envelope I handed him? It held the one truth he never wanted read aloud. Before we dive in, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment. I'll read everyone. Let me tell you, how my father tried to delete me. The gym smelled like sweat and cheap perfume, like every other graduation I'd watched from the bleachers growing up. But today I wasn't watching. I stood there, cap pinned too tight to my scalp, my black robe clinging to my skin in the Texas heat. They'd just called my name, Nomi Hartley, the last name I used because I didn't have another. I walked toward the stage, each step heavier than it should have been. Maybe because I thought, just for a second, that I'd hear a clap. Not wild applause, just something. My father wasn't the type to cheer, I knew that. But he was here, somewhere in the crowd. He'd shown up, sitting in his usual immaculate suit, probably frowning at how long this whole thing was taking. But still, he was here. I should have known better. I was halfway up the steps when it happened. My name still echoed over the speakers when I heard his voice. Sharp, cold. So much louder than it needed to be. "She's not my daughter." I froze. The world didn't. People gasped. Some laughed, nervous, confused. Phones lifted. I could hear cameras clicking, and his voice, steady as stone, filled the air again. "As of today, I cut off every cent, every support. She's no one to me." I felt my knees lock, but somehow I didn't fall. No one moved. For the first time in my life, I think the man who raised me felt proud of the silence. Not the silence in the gym, the silence inside me. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even think I could. I just stood there, the weight of 400 strangers watching me crumble without a sound. But I didn't. Instead, I thought of my mother. Silence only matters when you choose when to break it. She used to say that, after arguments, after long nights when his words had cut her down to nothing. My throat felt like glass as I swallowed. My legs moved. Not backward, not to run, but forward. I stepped up to the microphone. The principal reached out, maybe to stop me. He thought I was about to plead, maybe beg. But I didn't. I pulled the envelope from my graduation folder. White, plain. Light as air, but heavier than anything in my life. The words came out steady, even though I felt like I wasn't breathing. "Since we're sharing DNA secrets." I looked at him. Draven Hartley. My father. The man who thought his money could rewrite blood. I stepped closer, hearing whispers ripple like waves behind me. I held out the envelope. "Here." He didn't reach for it. The man who held courtrooms and boardrooms in the palm of his hand just stood there. I forced the envelope into his grip. The cameras flashed. I could feel the burn of strangers' eyes, the heat of their curiosity, their pity, their judgment. But I wasn't looking at them. I watched him. And for the first time in 18 years, I watched him shake. His hands trembled. His face, always so composed, turned ash white. He opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes darted, not at me, not at the envelope, but somewhere beyond, like he was searching for a door that didn't exist. But he hadn't opened it, not yet. He just stood there, clutching the paper that carried the truth he'd buried for so long. And I stood on that stage, staring down the man who'd just erased me from his life, knowing my own life had just split in two. before that moment, and after. I watched him standing there, motionless, like the envelope burned his hand, but he couldn't let it go. His knuckles whitened as he tightened his grip, yet he wouldn't meet my eyes. His gaze flicked somewhere over my shoulder, past the phones raised and the gasps frozen midair. No one spoke. The microphone beside me picked up the faint, ragged sound of my breathing. I could have said something. I could have screamed. But somehow, silence said more. He knew. He didn't need to open it. He knew exactly what was in that envelope. His body said it before his lips could. And as I stood there, feeling the weight of 400 strangers' eyes pressing down on me, the memory came uninvited. It had started 2 years ago. Back then, my world still made sense, or at least I thought it did. Mom had only been gone a few months. I remember the smell of her perfume still lingered in the upstairs hallway. It made the house feel full, even when it wasn't. I hadn't meant to overhear. It was late. They didn't know I was awake. I had crept down to the kitchen because sleep felt impossible that summer. I stood by the stairs, barefoot, cold tile against my skin, and heard voices. Sarah's voice, then his. She was never yours. I remember standing there, thinking I'd misheard. Thinking Sarah had said something cruel to him, a lie meant to hurt. And then I heard him, calm, tired, like this wasn't news at all. I know. That was it. 2 words. 2 words that cracked the foundation of everything I believed about my life. I remember backing up the stairs, holding my breath until my chest hurt. I didn't cry. Not then. Maybe I was too shocked to know how. After that night, I watched him differently. I watched how his eyes flicked away from mine when I asked simple questions. How Sarah's smiles around me always felt a second too late, like she was forcing them. I knew I couldn't ask, so I found my own way. It wasn't hard to find strands of his hair. A comb left in the upstairs bathroom. He never noticed. At the testing clinic downtown, they didn't ask questions when I paid in cash. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of pretending I didn't feel my world shifting underneath me. I opened the results alone. Sitting on my bedroom floor, cross-legged, in silence, I remember staring at the words, over and over. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. I felt cold, hollow. I waited to cry. I didn't. Instead, I replayed everything. Birthdays, school pickups, Christmas mornings. I watched them like old movies in my head, but they looked different now. Had he ever loved me? Or was I just the mistake he inherited from Mom? Every night after that felt the same. Lying awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the echo of Sarah's voice like a needle in my ear. She was never yours. I remember at one point whispering to the darkness, "Then whose am I?" But there was no answer, just the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. And then came the necklace. It happened 3 weeks before graduation. I'd come home from school early. I wasn't supposed to hear. Sarah was in the living room, her voice light, pleasant, the way she always spoke to Aris. "It suits you better anyway." It always looked too heavy on her. She was holding it in her hand. My mother's necklace. The silver aspen leaf. I'd traced it with my fingers 1,000 times as a child, watched it glint against Mom's skin every Sunday morning. Now it rested in Aris's palm, like it belonged there. Sarah laughed. "Besides, you're the real daughter." I didn't remember walking away. Only that I found myself sitting on the back porch, knees pulled to my chest, staring at nothing. I hadn't told anyone, not even when Aris wore it at brunch the following Sunday, like it was always hers. Mom's last thing. Gone. Just like me. I snapped back to the present as I realized my grip had tightened around the edge of the microphone. I looked up. He still hadn't opened the envelope, but he was holding it like it might explode. I watched the sweat bead at his temple, saw the slight tremor in his jaw. He whispered, "Not to me, not to the crowd," but I heard him. "Not here. Not now." I don't remember letting go of the microphone. My fingers must have opened on their own, somewhere between the moment his whisper hit the air and the sound of his footsteps echoing off the gym floor. I just stood there, staring as my father, if I could still call him that, walked away. His shoulders stiff, his back turned, envelope clutched tight like a wound. The crowd didn't move. Neither did I. My mind pulled back, further and further, until the gym disappeared entirely. All I could hear were voices from before, from the days when I still believed I belonged in that house. I remembered the whispers behind closed doors, how every conversation between Sarah and Draven seemed to end the moment I stepped near, how his eyes, once warm, even if distant, turned cold. Not angry, just indifferent, like I'd become background noise. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, that grief made people strange. But it wasn't grief. Not for him. He'd let her inside too easily. "You need to stop defending her," I once heard Sarah say through the door of his study. "She needs to grow up. She's still just a kid." "That's your problem." And then silence. The heavy, suffocating kind. I used to press my ear to the wall, straining to catch anything that sounded like love. I never did. Senior year should have been the best year of my life. Instead, it was when I faded. I stopped meeting friends after school. My grades slipped, not because I didn't understand, but because it didn't matter anymore. Every morning felt like waking up inside someone else's story. Looking back, I realized Sarah didn't have to poison his mind with lies. She just had to let me disappear. Let me become the quiet failure they expected. And I did. I let myself fade. Until that night. 3 weeks before graduation. I'd gone downstairs for water. Routine by then. Avoid the house during daylight. Survive in silence after dark. But that night, their voices carried from the kitchen. I shouldn't have heard. "She'll be out soon," Sarah said, casual, like she was planning a dinner party. "She doesn't belong here. And your father finally agrees." I froze. The glass trembled in my hand. "Are you serious?" Eris's voice, lighter, curious, like she couldn't quite believe her luck. Sarah laughed. A small, sharp sound. "He finally sees her for what she is." I didn't wait for more. Then I walked out the back door, glass still full, barefoot across the porch, down the steps, and onto the cool grass. I didn't go far, just far enough that the house felt like someone else's. I sat there until morning. I don't remember feeling cold or scared, just nothing. I think that's when I started grieving someone who wasn't even dead. Myself. It sounds stupid now, but when the people who are supposed to love you the most decide you don't count, it's a special kind of death, one no one else can see. But that night, something small kept me anchored. Not the necklace itself, not the silver leaf that had once hung from Mom's neck, but her voice, a memory, gentle, real. "You're not my legacy, Nomi. You're my joy." She'd said it once when I was little, curled in her lap on a Sunday morning. She brushed my hair back and whispered it like a promise. I repeated those words that night, over and over, and they stopped me from disappearing. Back in the gym, no, not Draven, my father, habit dies hard even in your own mind, stood near the exit, his frame rigid, back turned. He still hadn't opened the envelope. I watched his hand, shaking, white-knuckled. He turned to the crowd, voice low but steady, controlled. "There will be no more statements," he said. "This is a family matter." And then he walked, no apology, no explanation, just silence trailing after him like dust. The crowd parted for him like they didn't dare ask. I stood there, gripping the podium until my knuckles hurt, realizing in that moment he's running. From me. From the truth. And for the first time, I wasn't the one chasing. But I still followed. I didn't even remember leaving the school parking lot. My body just moved. I watched the taillights of his black SUV ahead of me, steady as a heartbeat, slicing through Houston's suburban streets. I could have turned left, driven anywhere else, but I didn't. My hands stayed firm on the steering wheel. Maybe part of me believed once he reached home, he'd have no choice but to face me. But when he pulled into the driveway, something shifted. His garage door slid shut before I even reached the curb. By the time I parked and walked up the familiar stone path, every light inside the house was dark. Completely dark. Not the cozy kind of quiet where a family sleeps inside. This was deliberate. A house emptied of welcome. I tried my key. It didn't fit. I checked it twice, then a third time, shaking the door handle harder with each attempt. The security panel near the door blinked steady red. Armed, reset. My hands trembled, not from fear, from the absurdity of it. He changed the locks. My house. I took a step back, standing there on the front porch under the porch light that had once flickered every October until Mom forced Dad to replace the bulb. My house. My steps. My door. And yet, in that moment, I was a stranger outside it. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I knocked. Quiet at first, then louder. Still nothing. Eventually, I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because I understood. He wasn't pretending anymore. He was erasing me. I sank down onto the porch steps, tucking my knees up against my chest. The stone felt colder than it should have in May. Maybe that was just me. Maybe everything felt colder now. I sat like that for hours, watching the windows, expecting a light to flicker on, a shadow to move. But nothing did. The house stayed dark, silent. And all I could think about was how many times I'd sat right here as a little girl, waiting for my mom to come home from her night shifts at the clinic. Sometimes I'd fall asleep waiting, and she'd carry me inside, whispering how she was sorry, that she should have come sooner. Now, there was no one to carry me in. At some point, I drifted off. Sleep wasn't rest. It was just absence. I woke to the distant hum of the mail truck. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But then I heard the rattle of the mailbox flap opening. I stood slowly, limbs aching, body stiff from the cold, and walked toward the street. That's when I saw it. A white envelope. My envelope. The exact same one I had handed Draven at graduation. Unopened, sealed, pristine, propped carefully inside the mailbox. I pulled it out with shaking hands, turning it over. My handwriting still scrawled across the front. The back, still sealed, untouched. But there was something else. A single folded note tucked beneath the envelope. His handwriting. Sharp. Economical. 4 words. Consider this matter closed. I didn't feel anger. Not right away. I felt hollow. Like something inside me, whatever fragile thread had kept me tied to him, just snapped. I stood there by the mailbox, holding both the envelope and the note, and stared at the house. My house. My childhood. My history. He wasn't running from me. He was deleting me. I could have opened the envelope right then. I could have torn it open, read those words again, let the confirmation of the DNA test hit me one more time. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just held it. Maybe I thought if I kept it sealed, it meant something wasn't final yet. So, I walked back to the porch steps and sat down, the same way I had the night before. I tucked the envelope inside my jacket, letting it rest against my heartbeat. And that's when her voice came back. Not Sarah's, not Eris's. My mother's. She'll be out soon. Those words, spoken by Sarah in the kitchen weeks ago, when she thought I wasn't listening. She'll be out soon. I wasn't gone yet. And I wasn't out. I kept telling myself I wasn't gone. I wasn't out. But every morning after graduation made that harder to believe. I spent my days at the public library off Westheimer Road, using their free Wi-Fi, pretending I was just any other young woman looking for a summer job before college. Except I wasn't. I didn't have college plans. I didn't have a home. And as of 2 weeks ago, I didn't even have a family. I sat at the same table every day, near the window, where the sunlight didn't quite reach. There's something about sitting in shadows that feels honest when you're hollow inside. My laptop wasn't mine. A friend lent it, saying, "You'll be fine, Nomi. Just apply everywhere. Something will work out." But nothing worked out. Every morning, I woke up on a spare couch at a friend's place. Every afternoon, I applied for jobs I wasn't going to get. Every night, I told myself maybe tomorrow. I remember the exact afternoon everything cracked. It was hot that day. Houston hot. I sat there, scrolling through social media, numb, half reading nothing. And then Sarah's post appeared like a slap. "A proud moment for our daughter Eris as she prepares for college." There she was, Eris, her smile perfect. My mother's necklace, the silver aspen leaf, resting neatly on her collarbone. The caption below glowed in blue. But what burned were the comments. Someone I didn't know wrote, "I thought you had 2 daughters." Sarah's reply was sharp as a knife. "Only one." I didn't remember closing the browser. I didn't remember standing up. I only remembered that somewhere between staring at the screen and the darkness that followed, something inside me folded in on itself. I wasn't just unwanted. I was erased. I don't know how long I stood by the library window, watching cars pass like nothing in my life had changed. By the time I sat down again, my coffee was cold. My hands were trembling, but not from the air conditioning. I logged out of everything. That night, I didn't speak to anyone when I returned to my friend's house. I faked a smile, said I was tired, and crawled onto the borrowed couch. I couldn't cry. I couldn't sleep. I thought about disappearing. Houston's a big city. It wouldn't be hard. A bus to San Antonio. Maybe further. No forwarding address. No explanations. It wasn't like anyone was waiting for me. I thought about it so seriously that I even Googled late-night bus schedules. It hit me then, no one would notice. Not even Sarah. Especially not Sarah. Maybe not even Draven. But something stopped me. Around midnight, I got up. I wasn't even sure why. Maybe because the silence was too heavy to lie beneath. Maybe because I needed to feel like something still belonged to me. At the back of my friend's spare room, buried under old boxes, sat my mother's jewelry box. I hadn't opened it since everything happened. I sat on the floor, the carpet scratching my knees, and flipped the brass latch. The smell hit me first. The faint scent of her old lavender perfume, still lingering after all these years. And there it was. The silver aspen leaf. Eris wore the public version. This one? This was the one that mattered. The real one. I held it. I didn't put it on. I just let it rest in my palm, feeling the coolness of the metal against my skin. It felt heavier than it looked. Or maybe I was just that empty. I remembered what my mother told me once, when I was too young to understand why anyone would lie. She knelt beside me and said softly, "You're not my legacy, Nomi. You're my joy." She hadn't lied. I whispered those words now. Not loud enough for anyone to hear, but just loud enough for me. I wasn't her mistake. I wasn't. Hours passed like that. I didn't know if I was falling asleep or just falling apart. But by dawn, something inside me felt different. Not stronger, just not as broken. I closed the jewelry box. For now, I wasn't gone. Not yet. I woke up in the same library chair I'd been sleeping in for 3 nights now. It wasn't real sleep, just moments where exhaustion finally overpowered anxiety. Morning light crept through the tall windows, casting long shadows between the rows of empty desks. Around me, the quiet hum of computers starting up signaled that another day was beginning. But today felt different. I wasn't here to hide anymore. I wasn't here to hope. I was here to watch. For weeks, I'd been drowning in questions. Now, I needed answers. I logged onto a public terminal in the corner, the same one I'd claimed as my own, and pulled up the county's property records. I didn't even know what I was searching for at first. Maybe just something. Anything to explain why my father, Draven Hartley, the man who used to call me his wildflower, had shut every door I tried to open. So, then I remembered. One night, months before my graduation, I'd passed the home office. The door was half closed, Sarah's voice drifting through. I'd only caught a few words. "Let me handle everything." Draven's voice replied, low and resigned. At the time, I thought it was about bills, maybe taxes. But sitting there now, blinking back tears in the harsh library light, I understood. She wasn't talking about bills, she was talking about control. It took hours, but the truth came piece by piece. Sarah Wynne wasn't just my stepmother. She was the financial controller of everything tied to my father. Every property, every bank account, even my stomach turned. My mother's savings, gone. The records showed the account closed 6 months earlier. No trace of where the money went, just a name beside the closure. Sarah Wynne Hartley. She'd drained it. I closed the browser and sat back, breath stuck somewhere between a gasp and a scream. People write about betrayal like it's sharp, like a knife. But that wasn't true. Not for me. It felt hollow, like falling down an elevator shaft. The free fall lasted too long, and as I stared at the dark screen in front of me, I realized it wasn't just me they were erasing. They were erasing my mother, too. At some point, hours later, I found myself standing in the records office downtown. I didn't remember leaving the library, didn't remember catching the bus. My body just moved, driven by some instinct that told me I had to see it with my own eyes. It took signing forms and a $40 fee, but the woman behind the counter handed me the folder without a second glance. Inside was my birth certificate. At first glance, it looked normal. My name, my birth date, the city, everything matched. But then I saw the change. Next to the field for legal guardian, Sarah's name had been added. A small, quiet addition, done through a court order. A guardianship transfer I knew nothing about. My mother's name? It was still there, just moved lower. As if she mattered less. As if time rewrote history itself. I stood there, holding the document, while people passed by without seeing me. She said I was her joy. The words echoed in my mind. My mother's voice, from a night I thought I'd forgotten. I was 10, maybe 11. We sat under the old aspen tree in the backyard. She'd pulled me close and whispered, "Nomi, you're not my legacy. You're my joy." I clutched the folder tighter. They weren't just cutting me out, they were cutting her out. By the time I stumbled back into the sunlight, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. Not this time. From anger. Not the screaming, throwing things kind of anger. No, this was something quieter, colder, a steady burn at the edges of every thought. I walked to the public storage unit where the few things I'd salvaged from my old life waited. A box marked, "Mom's Things." I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor and opened it carefully. There, tucked in tissue paper, was the silver aspen leaf necklace. For weeks I'd been too scared to look at it, but now I held it, letting the cool metal rest against my palm. That necklace had belonged to my mother. She wore it every Sunday morning, tracing its edge as she told me stories about trees that kept growing underground even after they'd been cut down. "You can cut the trunk," she'd said, "but you'll never kill the roots." I fastened the necklace around my neck. The metal was cold, but I wasn't. I spent the rest of the day in silence, collecting, copying. Every document, every proof, every scrap of paper that proved I existed, that my mother existed, that we mattered. I wasn't reckless anymore. I wasn't naive enough to scream the truth at people who wouldn't care. But I could prepare. I could document. If they wanted me silent, they should have left me ignorant. And by nightfall, I had a folder of everything they tried to bury. And for the first time in months, I felt something new. Not peace, not hope, purpose. The war started quietly, and they never saw me coming. I spent the next few days in silence, not the helpless kind I'd known, but the deliberate kind, the silence you choose when you're planning your next step. Houston's summer pressed heavy outside, but inside the library's chilled walls, I was steady, focused. I wasn't searching for jobs anymore. I wasn't scrolling through social feeds to see what Sarah or my father had erased next. No, I was studying. I learned words I never thought I'd need: legal guardianship, revocation, petition to restore parental record, public filings, free consultations, online case forums. I devoured it all, line by line. Each document I downloaded felt like a brick in a wall I was finally building around myself, not to hide behind, but to stand upon. I filed the paperwork on a Monday. I remember standing outside the Harris County Courthouse, the air thick, the asphalt radiating heat through my sneakers. I held the stamped receipt in my hands, longer than necessary. The courthouse doors closed behind me, heavy and final. For once, I wasn't the one being shut out. My petition was simple: restore my mother's name as my primary legal parent. Remove Sarah Wynne from any guardianship over me, effective immediately. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Walking back to the borrowed apartment where I was staying felt different that day. I wasn't invisible anymore, not to myself. That night, in the quiet of that small living room where I'd been crashing on a friend's couch, I looked at myself in the mirror. There was no celebration, no victory smile. Just my own face staring back, pale, tired, but clear-eyed. For the first time in months, I didn't look like someone waiting to be rescued. I looked like someone who understood no one was coming. The next morning, I heard about the HOA meeting. Sarah had always loved those neighborhood meetings. She thrived on running things: the newsletter, the bake sales, the neighborhood watch group she took over like it was a corporate acquisition. She'd schedule mandatory sessions for things no one cared about, and then stand there as if she were royalty, addressing her constituents. I didn't plan to go, not at first, but then I thought about the night I heard her tell Eris, "She'll be out soon," and something in me shifted. 2 days later, I walked into that meeting. I wore my mother's necklace that morning. For weeks, I'd only held it, but today, I needed its weight. The silver aspen leaf rested just below my collarbone, cool against my skin. It felt like armor. Sarah stood at the front of the community center, all smiles and fake warmth, talking about upcoming landscaping projects. The usual people sat in folding chairs, fanning themselves with printed agendas. Then I walked in. People turned. Some whispered. Sarah's voice faltered for half a second, but she recovered. Of course she did. That was Sarah. She could have sold poison as lemonade. I didn't stop walking until I stood 3 feet from her. She looked at me like I was dirt she couldn't scrape off, and I said one sentence, just one. "You claim to raise me as your daughter. Legally, that ends today." I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I didn't hand out copies of my filing. I didn't need to. Silence crashed over the room. For the first time, Sarah's mask cracked. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes darted around, looking for someone to save her, but Draven wasn't there. He'd stopped showing up to these meetings months ago, once Sarah secured her control over everything that mattered to him. Neighbors exchanged glances. They weren't whispering anymore. They were staring. Sarah whispered something. I didn't catch it. Then she fled. Literally fled. Her heels clattered as she bolted out the back door, leaving her clipboard behind. I stood there another 30 seconds. Then I turned and left. Walking home, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. I didn't look victorious when I passed the windows downtown and caught my reflection. I looked like someone who'd lost everything except herself. And that, I realized, was enough. Not a prize, not yet, but a start. I spent that evening alone. I didn't expect the letter that arrived. The envelope was thick, official, from the courthouse. For a second, my heart lifted. I thought it was confirmation of my filing. But no, inside was a court summons. Draven was contesting my petition. He wasn't done, but neither was I. The air inside the courthouse felt like it hadn't moved in years. I sat there alone at the long wooden table, fingertips brushing the cold grain as if that might steady me. Across from me, Draven sat flanked by his attorney, a man whose name I never learned and didn't care to. My father, though that word barely fit anymore, kept his gaze fixed somewhere beyond my shoulder, never quite meeting my eyes. Sarah wasn't here. I wasn't surprised. She'd always known when to vanish. I'd rehearsed every breath of this day in my head, but now that I was here, it didn't feel like battle. It felt like waiting for something to end. The judge entered. Papers shuffled. Formalities droned on. And then, finally, it was my turn. I stood. My voice, when I spoke, didn't shake. Your Honor, I submit this as evidence. The envelope felt heavier than it should as I passed it to the clerk. It was the same one I'd held on graduation day, still sealed, still waiting. I hadn't opened it because I didn't need to. Draven hadn't opened it because he already knew. But now, the truth wasn't just between us. It was public. I sat down and watched the judge slit open the envelope carefully, like it held something fragile. He read in silence. Every tick of the clock on the far wall sounded too loud. I didn't breathe. Then came the words. The court acknowledges that the petitioner, Nomi Hartley, is the biological daughter of the respondent, Draven Hartley. No gasps, no outcry, just silence. And in that silence, I watched Draven's shoulders slump. His head dipped forward. His lawyer said nothing. For the first time, Draven didn't look like the man who built an empire. He looked old, hollow, defeated, and I felt nothing. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look at me. The judge called for closing remarks, but there weren't any. Draven's lawyer requested time for further filings. Granted. Adjourned. The session ended just like that. My name restored. My existence confirmed. As I stood to leave, I passed behind Draven's chair. I didn't stop. I didn't hesitate. But I did lean just enough to let my words carry where only he could hear them. You didn't lose me, Dad. You gave me away. He flinched. I kept walking. The doors swung open, and sunlight hit me like a slap. I stepped out onto the courthouse steps, and only then realized how hard I'd been holding my breath. The sky was too blue, the air too clean. Everything felt wrong. I looked down at the papers in my hand, official, notarized, stamped, proof of who I was. But standing there, I didn't feel victorious. I felt emptied out, like someone who'd lost everything except herself. I found a bench near the sidewalk and sat down. Cars passed, people passed. No one looked at me, and maybe that was the cruelest part. I reached up and touched the silver aspen leaf at my neck. The necklace had grown warm against my skin. I closed my fingers around it, feeling its edges bite softly into my palm. Mom used to say aspens survive because their roots run deep, even after the trunks fall. Today, I believed her. I stayed there until the shadows stretched long across the courthouse lawn, until my body ached from sitting still, until I was sure Draven had left the building. Only then did I stand. When I got home, no, not home, back to the tiny guest room at Jess's apartment where I'd been staying, I found a letter waiting. My name printed neatly on the front. Court summons. He was contesting. I sat on the edge of the borrowed bed and stared at the envelope in my lap. My fingers didn't tremble. My chest didn't tighten. I just felt steady, because he wasn't done. But neither was I. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Empty windows stared back at me as I pulled into the cracked driveway. 2 months had passed since the verdict, yet standing here, the silence felt heavier than anything that had happened in court. They'd left. He'd left. Packed up and disappeared like I'd been some chapter he regretted writing. I stepped out of the car slowly, letting the morning air settle on my skin. The neighborhood felt quieter now. No signs of Sarah's manic gardening, no forced smiles from neighbors avoiding the drama next door. Only for sale signs and overgrown hedges. The key I once carried like a badge of belonging sat heavy in my pocket, but I didn't need it. The front door was already ajar. Inside, the house felt wrong. Echoes in empty rooms where once there'd been arguments, holidays, birthdays I'd stopped celebrating. My footsteps didn't even creak on the old floorboards anymore. The house wasn't holding on to me. It was letting me go. In the kitchen, sunlight filtered through slanted blinds, throwing thin gold bars across the dust-heavy air. I stood there longer than I should have, half expecting some ghost of childhood to tug my sleeve and remind me this was home. But there was nothing. Then the phone buzzed. I let it ring once, twice, before sliding it from my back pocket. No caller ID, just a voicemail. Without thinking, I pressed play. His voice. I thought keeping you away would protect you from me. I was wrong. I hope you're better than I ever was. That was all. Nothing more. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because there was nothing left to grieve. Those words weren't love. But maybe, in his way, it was the closest he could come to saying he'd failed me. And somehow, that felt heavier than anger. I moved through the house, one step at a time. Into the hallway, where Sarah used to hang her curated family portraits. Into the living room, where Dad used to fall asleep in front of the TV, back when he still looked at me like I mattered. Each room was a memory I didn't want, but couldn't forget. In the corner of the old dining room, I paused. The light hit the silver aspen leaf around my neck, my mother's necklace. She'd told me once it symbolized survival, that even after the tree fell, its roots lived on. I touched the pendant gently, letting its weight remind me I was still here. That even if no one called me daughter anymore, even if every photo had been taken down, I wasn't erased, just rewritten. In the kitchen, I found the last thing worth finding: the house keys. Sitting in a small ceramic bowl next to the sink. Dad hadn't mailed them back. He'd just left them, as if the house didn't need to belong to anyone anymore. I stood there for a long while, keys in my palm, wondering if leaving them meant giving up or letting go. Eventually, I placed them back in the bowl. I whispered, not to the house, but to myself. Sometimes justice doesn't look like an apology. It looks like standing up and saying, "You can't erase me." I wasn't walking out of here for revenge or closure. I was walking out because I chose to. At the doorway, I glanced back once, only once. Then I stepped outside into the morning sun. Outside, everything looked new. Not easier, not healed, but new. I didn't need the voicemail. I didn't need the house. I didn't need their version of me. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing who you'll become after. That was the last lesson my mother taught me. So if you're hearing this, if you've ever had to fight just to be remembered, tell me. I'll listen.